Hello, in this e-training module we're going to take a quick look at using the spatial model editor to despeckle a land cover classification. Because land cover classification is generally a per pixel operation, you get these isolated pixels left over in the imagery, generally referred to as a salt and pepper style effect, and some people don't want that very fine level of detail in their GIS layers for further analysis. So they want to clean it up a little bit and make it look smoother. So that's what we're going to have a look at using the spatial model editor to perform. So the first thing we want to do obviously is start the editor. File, New, Spatial Model Editor. We'll start up the editing canvas for us. And then we want to bring in our land cover classification that we want to analyze. So I'm going to come up here to Operators, drag in a raster input, and to spatially process the data to remove salt and pepper effects, we need a moving window definition. So we're going to look for a kernel matrix. So I'm going to type kernel in the search area and find kernel matrix input. And go ahead and drag and drop that onto my canvas as well. Just reorient those, deselect them. Double click the kernel matrix input, and bring up the matrix source dialog. And we're going to use existing matrices from a library. Click the From library, and we're going to start at least and try a 3x3 moving window. I'm going to go ahead and add that in from the library. And go ahead and click OK. And you can see now we have a 3x3 low pass defined. We'll come back to that later and try some different moving windows and see their effect upon the data, but we're just going to start with that at the beginning. So now we want to actually use that matrix, so we're going to pull in a function called focal majority. So I'm going to search for a focal operator in the focal category. Going to go ahead and take focal majority, and what this is going to do is it's going to take in our land cover classification. If we drag and drop and connect those two together from the raster input to the raster input port of focal majority, and we also want to use the matrix, so that's going to go into the focus port of focal majority. And what this is going to say is it's going to look at that for each pixel in the input image. It's going to look at the 3x3 array of pixels around that location and say, okay, what's the majority class within those 9 pixels, and it's going to assign that value to the center pixel location and then move on to the next pixel location for analysis and so on. So let's actually see what that's going to do by dragging in a preview operator, connect the output of focal majority to the input of the preview, and then we'll go ahead and click on the preview button. The one thing that has happened here immediately is that I have a red X on my raster input. Something in my model is incorrect, it's not running. So I can go ahead and look in the Messages panel, come up here onto the Spatial Model tab, View Group, click Messages, and you can see what went wrong. No input file available. I forgot to define the raster input and say what it was. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to close out my Messages panel, get rid of that preview window, double click my raster input, and I need to define the raster input on that particular operator as being the supervised Cherokee land cover classification. I have that on my recent list, so I can go ahead and pick that easily and click OK. And now let's try preview again. This time we get a result. Now we don't have colors defined on these land cover classifications. It's just a grayscale with the class colors assigned at the moment. Let's go ahead and equalize the scale so it matches my original image. But you can start to see some of the generalization going on of removing speckle in the results at the lower right here. And I can use a shortcut to experiment with the size of my moving window or even the shape of it, but I'm going to use a quick shortcut by just double clicking on the 3x3 low pass kernel name, and I'm going to edit it to be a 5x5. Click OK, and you can see my data generalizes further. Go ahead and change it to, say, a 9x9 moving window. So taking into account a much broader area or group of pixels and saying what is the majority in that 9x9 array. Probably overgeneralizing at this point. So I'm actually going to go back to, say, a 5x5 as a reasonable compromise between smoothing and removing too much detail from my Landcover classification. You can see everything happens in real time as I change the matrix. So that's pretty much got our despeckling or salt and pepper removal defined. We actually don't want to really just do this as a standalone operation though. We want to combine this with a model that we developed in one of the other e-training modules. The model that basically burns roads into the Landcover classification. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag through the first 3 operators. I'm not really interested in the preview. Drag through them so they all become selected, indicated by the blue color. Right click and copy, or you can also drag through and use the keyboard shortcuts of Control-C. Add that portion of the model into the paste buffer. Then what we're going to do actually is turn off the preview and remove that model without saving it. And we're going to go ahead and open that model that we prepared in the previous e-training module. Here it is. Let's just close that window. Let's get rid of that window as well, just so you can see that model. Again, it brings in that raster data that we were just looking at. But it brings in also a vector layer of roads, turns those into a raster and burns them in, and copies across the attributes that you saw. I was lacking the color previously. So what we're going to do is get rid of that particular raster input just by selecting it and clicking delete. And then if I Control V or paste, I can bring in those operators that I was just defining. So now we have the focal majority version of the Landcover classification. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring that into the conditional statement. I'm going to pass the original attributes across to the attach attributes operator. Now if I click preview, it's going to go ahead and rasterize that data. And now you can see not only do I have generalized Landcover classes, I also have the burnt in roads. And because this is the spatial model editor and I'm performing a preview, we can still perform operations like changing the kernel to a 7x7. Click OK, and you see the effect in the viewer instantly in the right hand side. So once you're happy with the type of result that you're looking at, you can go ahead and click run and produce a version of that data set on disk. So there you have it, a quick and easy way of removing salt and pepper effects from a Landcover classification and combining that into a larger overall spatial model for processing your thematic raster GIS layers and vector GIS layers. Thank you very much. One last thing that I was going to mention is if anybody was wondering why I still have isolated pixels in my Landcover classification results. I'm running a focal majority. You'd expect it to be removing these isolated pixel locations. Well, actually, in this instance, there are no data locations. And that's because there has been a tie for the focal majority at those locations. Two classes shared the same number of pixels. Say you might have in a 3x3 moving window, you might have 3 of classification trees and 3 of classification road, and so there's a tie. And by default, ties get no data. So what you can do is come into the focal majority operator, double click on that, and there is an option down here of ties get no data. Turn that off and you'll instantly see that all those little isolated no data locations go away and are filled in with the original data instead. So just if you were wondering what was going on there, that's exactly the reason.